Welcome into another edition of Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery. A lot to cover today as we'll take a look at the edge rushers in this upcoming draft. Yes, we are literally 1 week away from the NFL draft. I'm going to give my personal ranking of the top 5-6 edge rushers. We'll see how many we get to. Trae Young with some words for the officiating after the game as we get ready for Hawks on Friday. And well, luckily they almost avoided a disaster. Well, they did avoid a disaster in Washington because they're lucky that there weren't some surface-to-air missiles deployed. Yeah, it's a crazy story. I'll explain it all next. It is Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
We welcome you into Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery. We thank you so much for being a part of the show today. We want you to go to our YouTube channel. Of course, you know where to head. Go to YouTube, get in the browser, put in Locked On Sports Atlanta, and when that pops up, hit the subscribe button. Leave us a review. Tell us what you think of the show. Also, don't forget, you can follow me on my Twitter page at JMCH316. We are 1 week, 7 days away from the NFL draft. And look, we've talked a lot about the NFL draft with the Atlanta Falcons and how important it is, and how obviously now that the Matt Ryan era is over and Julio gone, who knows what Grady Jarrett will have happen to him if he stays around, Calvin Ridley on suspension. It is a new era of Falcons football. With that, though, in the draft, I still think that the edge position is still the absolute top priority for the Falcons. And look, we've gone over all the numbers, right? The Falcons were literally 11 sacks behind the next lowest team. They had 18 sacks in 17 games this past season. That's a dreadful number for an NFL franchise. You can't be that deficient at one of the most important ways to change the outcome of a game. And the Falcons have to address the edge player, to me, at the top of their draft. Now, whether that's they stay at 8, whether that's they move up, back, sideways, I don't really care. But I want whoever is the best edge player, in the draft at whatever spot the Falcons pick at. Now, I'm going to give you kind of my personal ranking for the edge players. This is based upon having seen these guys play. This is also based upon interviews that I've done with people who are on campus, that are guys that watch these guys every day. So we're talking beat writers for the local paper. We're talking about the play-by-play voices of the particular teams. Had a chance last night to catch up with Jim Brandstatter. 43 years as the play-by-play voice of Michigan football. So, guys like that come with credibility and also give me a pretty good insight and kind of shoot straight with me about what they are or what they are not. So here is my personal list. When I look at the edge players in this draft, here's how I would rank them. All right, number 1 for me is Kayvon Thibodeaux. Now, I know there's lots of questions, and in fact, had a chance yesterday to talk with the guy who first put out the story about, does Thibodeau maybe not love football? Does he take some plays off? Blah, 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 blah. Well, first off, I hate to tell everybody, but most defensive linemen do take some plays off and things like that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think Thibodeau, 6'4", 254 pounds, is the best edge player in this draft, though. When you look at his production, and it was limited because, if nothing else, because of injuries, COVID, things like that, it really did limit how much production he actually got out on the field. But when he's at his best, he's as good as any player in college football. He's a guy who can put his hand in the dirt. He's a guy who can play a Sam linebacker. He's a guy who can stand on the outside of a line of scrimmage. I just think when you look at the athleticness that Thibodeau has, and I think if you look at his production when he's ready to go and he's healthy, think about last year. He really only played about 9 games that he was healthy last year, and he did miss the Ohio State game being one of those, but certainly he's been a game wrecker in his time in college. I just think when you look at all of the factors of upside and everything else that go along with Thibodeau, I think he's the number 1 edge rusher for me in this draft. Number 2 for me is Aidan Hutchinson, and he may be the most complete edge player that we have in this draft. it was interesting. I was talking with Jim Brandstatter last night about Aidan Hutchinson, and he said, John, uh, Hutchinson had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And that's the second time I've heard this about a defensive end or edge player from a Big Ten school. The other was a guy we'll talk about in George Karloftis. And I thought to it just dawned on me to ask him, like, what is it about that? And the answer was sort of, what I figured. The SEC players, the Big Ten, I should say the Ohio State players, so many of those guys get a lot more love than even, say, a Hutchinson at Michigan or, a Karloftis at Purdue. That sometimes they get overshadowed about how good that they really are. We hear all kinds of things about, the Georgia players, the Alabama defensive players, Ohio State defensive players. But Aidan Hutchinson was maybe the most productive defensive player in the country last year. He was the runner-up to the Heisman, of course, 6'6", 260 pounds. He may be the most complete edge player that there is in the draft. So if you're talking about a guy with the combination of size, strength, speed, play the run, play on passing downs and get the quarterback, there may not be a better guy that is in this draft than Aidan Hutchinson. I love both of those guys at the top, but if we're being realistic, the idea that they will probably be there at 8 is probably sort of far-fetched. I don't believe that either one of those guys is going to be there for the Falcons to draft. So with that, as we get into the next grouping of players, my next edge player, excuse me, maybe the most freakish athlete in the entire draft, Trayvon Walker out of Georgia, 6'5", 272 pounds. Now, the thing about Walker is, statistically, if you look at him, he obviously doesn't have the eye-catching numbers. He doesn't have the eye-popping numbers. Hutchinson's got that big 15-sack number that jumps right out at you, right? So Walker, while he doesn't have that, certainly played a lot of different roles in Georgia's defense. He was asked to drop in coverage a lot of different times. I don't think in the NFL you're going to see Walker have to drop into coverage and do some of the things and really help out other guys on the defense the way that he did at the University of Georgia. If you can focus him on just allowing him to take his athleticism, take his speed and his size, and just use that to go after quarterbacks in the NFL. And let's face it, in the NFL, when you have all of this talent around you, sometimes you don't need guys like Walker to work with other guys like you would in college and try to make other guys better. Guys like Walker, you can turn them loose on their own. I think Walker, given a chance to just kind of spread his wings and be a pass rusher completely in the NFL, I think he can be a double-digit sack guy. I think he can be a guy that puts up big numbers in the NFL for a long time. And again, when you're talking about 6'5", 272 pounds, and you can move and run like he does, he's an absolute load out there. Number 4 for me, Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State. 6'4", 254 pounds. He was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year this past year. If you want to talk about guys who did themselves well early on in the evaluation process, few guys did better than Jermaine Johnson, and he excelled at the Senior Bowl this year. And that was the place that I think really started turning a lot of heads. Now, remember, he went to the University of Georgia to play, didn't end up making their squad, and just couldn't find a spot there, transfers to Florida State, and he becomes the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. I love Johnson. He's maybe my personal favorite, given where the Falcons draft. So we'll be interested to see if he's going to be there. And very quickly, my last pick, George Karloftis, number 5 out of Purdue. After talking to Purdue's play-by-play guy, I really got more of an appreciation for how good Karloftis was. Maybe he doesn't have the speed of some of the other guys, but he's got that quote-unquote 1-2 will. He's got that motor. He gets after people, and he's another guy who plays with a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't look at himself being compared to Hutchinson and some of the guys from Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia. He's a guy that you look at, and he's got that brute strength, and he's got that power. Can he have a little bit of speed to go with it? If he does, he could be very productive in the NFL. So that's my top 5 edge players coming up in the draft, and we'll talk more about the draft next week and give you my thoughts about that. When we come back, though, Trey Young had some comments for the officiating after what happened down in Miami. Was he sending a message? We'll kind of break that down next. It is Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.